6 months ago, my own flesh and blood left me to die in a hospital corridor because my life wasn't worth $50,000 to them. Tonight they sat across from me in the most expensive steakhouse in Chicago, ordered a $300 bottle of wine, and asked me to give them $500,000 cash to chase a dream. I looked at their smiling faces, I touched the scar hidden beneath my shirt, where the surgeons cut me open, and I prepared to burn their world to the ground. Before I tell you how I taught them a lesson they will never forget, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. It really helps to share these stories. And let me know in the comments where you are watching from. I read every single one. The air conditioning inside the Prime Cut was set to freezing, but I was sweating. My charcoal suit, the one I had bought for my wife Beatrice's funeral 3 years ago, felt like a vice around my chest. It was too tight in the shoulders, and the wool was scratchy against my neck, but I didn't loosen my tie. I was raised to have manners, even when I was dining with vultures. I sat there and watched my son Brandon. He is 38 years old, but in that dim restaurant light, he looked like a child playing dress-up in his father's clothes. He was holding the wine list like it was a sacred text. He snapped his fingers at the sommelier, a gesture that made my skin crawl. I spent 40 years in construction, hauling concrete and climbing scaffolding. I know how hard people work for a living. Seeing my son treat a worker like a servant made me want to leave right then and there. "Bring us the Cabernet," Brandon said, pointing at a line on the menu without even looking at the price. "And make sure it breathes for at least 15 minutes. I looked down at the white tablecloth. My hands were resting there. They are ugly hands. The knuckles are swollen from arthritis. There is a scar running down my left thumb from a table saw accident in '98. The skin is rough, like sandpaper stained permanently by oil and cement dust that no amount of scrubbing can ever remove. They are the hands of a man who built half the foundations in this county." Then I looked at Brandon's hands. They were soft. His fingernails were manicured. On his wrist sat a Rolex Submariner that caught the light every time he moved. I knew for a fact he was still making payments on it. He had leased a lifestyle he couldn't afford to impress people he didn't like. Tiffany. My daughter-in-law reached across the table and touched my arm. Her fingers were cold. "Harry, you look wonderful," she said. Her voice was high and sweet like syrup masking the taste of bitter medicine. "That suit really brings out the dignity in your eyes." I didn't smile. I knew what she was doing. I had been a general contractor for 4 decades. I know when someone is inspecting a building to see if the foundation is cracking. She wasn't looking at my eyes. She was looking at the old Timex watch on my wrist. She was looking at the fraying collar of my shirt. But mostly, she was looking at me the way a butcher looks at a cow, estimating how much value she could harvest before the end. "I'm fine, Tiffany," I said, taking a sip of water because I refused to order the $20 cocktails they were drinking. "I'm just an old man eating dinner." "Oh, stop it," Brandon laughed, but his eyes didn't smile. "You are as strong as an ox, Dad. That heart attack 6 months ago was just a speed bump. You have got another 20 years in you easily." A speed bump. That is what he called the night my heart stopped beating. I felt a flash of anger so hot, it almost made me dizzy, but I pushed it down. I needed to hear them out. I needed to see exactly how far they would go. The waiter poured the wine. Brandon swirled it in his glass, sniffed it, and gave a theatrical nod. I just wanted a cold beer, but I kept my mouth shut. So Dad Brandon started leaning forward. His tone shifted. It was no longer the casual dinner chat. It was the sales pitch. I recognized it immediately. It was the same tone con artists used when they tried to sell me bad lumber back in the day. "We didn't just bring you here for the steak," he said, flashing a charming smile. "We have found it. The opportunity of a lifetime." Tiffany nodded enthusiastically beside him. "It is destiny, Harry. Absolute destiny." I slowly cut a piece of my steak. I chewed it thoroughly before answering. What opportunity? Brandon pulled out his phone and started swiping through photos. It is a location in the West Loop. Prime real estate. An old industrial warehouse that is just begging to be converted. Tiffany and I have been working on a concept. A fusion restaurant, high-end, exclusive. The kind of place where you need a reservation 3 months in advance. He turned the phone towards me. I saw pictures of a dilapidated brick building with broken windows. It looks like a ruin, I said flatly. That is the beauty of it, Tiffany interjected. It has character. We have the vision, Harry. We have the menu planned. We have the design team ready. We just need the capital to secure the lease and start the renovations. I put my fork down. The metal clinked loudly against the china plate. I looked from my son to his wife. They were dressed in designer clothes. They drove a BMW that belonged to the bank. They lived in a high-rise condo that I had foolishly co-signed for 5 years ago. And here they were asking for more. How much, I asked. Brandon cleared his throat. He took a big sip of wine for courage. We have run the numbers, Dad. To secure the location, do the build-out, and have operating cash for the first 6 months, we need $500,000. The number hung in the air between us. $500,000. $500,000 cash, Brandon added quickly. We need to move fast. There are other bidders. If we can put the cash down this week, the landlord will give us the keys. I looked at him. Really looked at him. I tried to find the little boy who used to follow me around job sites carrying my tool belt. I tried to find the teenager I taught to drive in my old Ford truck, but they were gone. Sitting in front of me was a stranger with greedy eyes. You want $500,000, I repeated slowly. It is an investment, Dad, Tiffany said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Think about the legacy. The Foster family name on the hottest spot in Chicago. And we would pay you back, with interest, or equity. We can discuss the terms. They thought I was stupid. They thought that because I spent my life covered in drywall dust and sawdust, that my brain had stopped working. They thought that because I lived alone in the old house in the suburbs and drove a beat-up truck, that I didn't know the value of $1. I didn't say a word. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table even though every fiber of my being wanted to. Instead, I reached into the inside pocket of my tight jacket. I pulled out my wallet. It was old leather, cracked and worn at the edges, shaped by years of sitting in my back pocket. Brandon's eyes lit up. He actually thought I was going to pull out a checkbook. He thought I was going to write him a check for $500,000 right there between the appetizer and the main course. But I didn't open the cash compartment. I reached into the hidden slot behind my ID. My fingers brushed against the folded piece of paper I had kept there for exactly 180 days. I pulled it out. It was a single sheet of paper folded into quarters, the edges soft and fuzzy from wear. I unfolded it slowly, smoothing it out on the crisp white tablecloth next to the wine glass. It wasn't a check. It wasn't a bank statement. Brandon looked down, confused. Tiffany squinted, trying to read the faded ink upside down. What is this? Brandon asked, his smile faltering for the first time. I placed my heavy, calloused hand on the paper. Read it, I said. My voice was low, but it cut through the noise of the restaurant like a diamond saw. Read the date, and read the total. It was a hospital bill from St. Jude's Medical Center dated November 14th of last year. The total amount due was $52,300, printed in bold red ink at the bottom. It was the cost of the emergency angioplasty and the specialized stent procedure that my insurance had deemed elective and refused to cover up front. Brandon picked up the paper. His manicured fingers brushed over the crinkled edges. He squinted at the numbers and then looked at me with a confused expression, as if I had handed him a menu in a language he didn't speak. That is a medical bill, he said, his voice flat. Why are you showing us this? Because 6 months ago, on that specific date, I was lying on a gurney in the emergency room hallway, convinced I was taking my last breaths. It started as a pressure in the center of my chest, like someone had parked a cement mixer right on my sternum. Then the pain radiated down my left arm and up into my jaw. I have broken bones, torn ligaments, and stepped on rusty nails in my line of work, but I have never felt pain like that. It was absolute and terrifying. The triage nurse told me I needed a specific procedure immediately to clear the blockage, but because of a clerical error with my provider and the specific nature of the device they needed to use, the hospital required a significant deposit before they could wheel me into surgery. They needed money I didn't have liquid in my checking account, so I did what any father would do. I reached for my phone with shaking hands. My vision was blurring at the edges, and every beat of my heart felt like it might be the last one. I scrolled to your name, Brandon, my firstborn, the boy I had carried on my shoulders, the man I had co-signed loans for. I pressed call. It rang 4 times. Then you answered. But you didn't say hello. I heard the heavy thumping bass of electronic dance music. I heard laughter and the clinking of glasses. You were shouting over the noise. "What is it, Dad?" you yelled. "I am kind of in the middle of something here." I tried to keep my voice steady, but I was gasping for air. "I told you I was at the hospital. I told you I was having a heart attack. I told you they needed a payment, or they wouldn't operate. And do you remember what you said to me, Brandon?" I looked across the table at him now. He shifted in his seat, taking a nervous sip of his expensive wine. He didn't answer, so I answered for him. You sighed. A loud, impatient sigh. "You said, Dad, you have insurance for this kind of thing." "Look, I can't transfer anything right now. All my liquidity is tied up in crypto. The market is volatile, and if I pull out now, I will lose my position. Call Megan." Then you hung up. The line went dead. I was holding the phone against my ear, listening to the silence while my heart struggled to pump blood through my veins. I called your sister next. She told me she had her own debts and maybe I should look into a reverse mortgage on the house. I was alone. Truly and completely alone. The hospital administrator was standing over me with a clipboard, looking at me with pity, but not enough pity to waive the policy. I needed cash. Fast. I didn't have time to argue. I didn't have time to cry about raising children who valued digital coins over their father's life. I pulled myself off that gurney. The nurses tried to stop me. They told me I could die if I exerted myself. I told them I would be right back. I walked out into the hospital parking lot. It was freezing that night. The wind off the lake cut right through my thin jacket. I was sweating cold, clammy sweat, and my chest felt like it was being crushed by a vice. I walked to my truck. It was a 1978 Ford F-150, custom cab, 2-tone paint blue and white. It wasn't just a truck. It was the first new vehicle I ever bought. It was the truck I drove when I picked up your mother for our first anniversary dinner. It was the truck where I taught you how to drive stick shift in the high school parking lot. It was the truck Beatrice loved. She used to say that the rumble of that V8 engine was the sound of safety because it meant I was coming home. I had restored it with my own hands. Every bolt, every hose, every inch of upholstery. It was worth $40,000 easily to the right collector. Maybe more. But I didn't have time to find a collector. I drove it wincing with every turn of the wheel down the street to a 24-hour used car lot that advertised instant cash for titles. The guy working there was a shark. He saw an old man clutching his chest, pale as a sheet, desperate for money. He walked around the truck, kicking the tires, pointing out invisible scratches. He knew what he had. He knew what I needed. "I will give you $12,000 for it," he said, blowing cigarette smoke in my face. "It is worth 3 times that," I wheezed. "Take it or leave it, Pops," he said, turning his back on me. I signed the title over on the hood of the truck. My hand was shaking so badly, I could barely write my own name. I took the check. I handed him the keys. I watched him get in and rev the engine, grinding the gears because he didn't know how to treat a lady like that. I walked back to the hospital in the cold. I paid the deposit. I had the surgery. And when I woke up in the recovery room, there were no flowers. There were no cards. There was just the empty chair beside my bed and the realization that my truck was gone and my children were strangers. I finished my story and let the silence hang heavy over the table. The noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away. Brandon was staring at his wine glass, refusing to meet my eyes. He looked uncomfortable but not heartbroken. He looked like a man who had been caught in a minor lie, not a son who had abandoned his father. But it was Tiffany's reaction that truly turned my stomach. She let out a short, dismissive breath, almost a laugh. She waved her hand in the air as if she were shooing away a fly. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Harry," she said, rolling her eyes. "That is ancient history. Why are you bringing up all that drama now?" "Drama," I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. "Yes, drama," she said, leaning forward, her jewelry clinking against the table. "You survived, didn't you? You are sitting right here eating a steak. The surgery obviously worked. And honestly, that old truck was an eyesore. It smelled like gasoline and old dogs. You should be thanking us for forcing you to upgrade." She picked up her wine glass and took a long swallow, leaving a lipstick stain on the rim. "We are talking about the future here, Harry," she continued, her voice taking on that lecturing tone she used when she thought I was being difficult. "We are talking about building generational wealth. We are talking about an investment that will pay off 10 times over. Why are you dwelling on the past when we are trying to make you rich? You need to get over it. We were busy. People get busy. It happens. Now about the 500,000. I looked at her. I looked at the woman my son had married. I saw the absolute void behind her eyes where empathy should have been. She didn't care that I had almost died. She didn't care that I had to sell the last physical piece of my wife I had left. To her, my near-death experience was just an inconvenience, a stumbling block in her conversation about money. She thought I was just an ATM with a pulse. And Brandon, my son, sat there and let her speak to me that way. He didn't defend me. He didn't apologize. He just nodded along, tapping his fingers on the table, waiting for me to open my wallet again. I felt a cold calm wash over me. It was the same calm I felt before demolishing a condemned building. "You check the supports, you clear the area, and you plant the charges." "You are right, Tiffany," I said, folding the invoice and putting it back into my pocket. "I am alive, and I am thinking about the future." Their faces lit up. They thought they had won. They thought the old man had capitulated just like he always did. "Good," Brandon said, smiling that plastic smile. "I knew you would see reason, Dad. So how do we do this?" "A wire transfer would be fastest. We can go to the bank tomorrow morning." I picked up my napkin and wiped my mouth. I stood up slowly, buttoning my tight jacket. "I am not giving you a wire transfer," I said. Brandon looked confused. "A check, then. A cashier's check is fine." "I am not giving you a check either," I said. Tiffany's smile faltered. "Then how are you going to give us the money?" I looked down at them. I looked at the expensive wine, the unfinished steaks, the Rolex, the designer dress. I looked at two people who believed the world owed them a living simply because they existed. I reached into my pocket again. This time I pulled out a single $100 bill. I dropped it onto the table. It fluttered down and landed right in the center of their plate of appetizers. "That is for my steak," I said. "Dad." "What are you doing?" Brandon asked, his voice rising in panic. "Sit down. We haven't finished discussing the business plan." "There is no business plan," I said. "And there is no $500,000. Not for you." Tiffany stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You can't be serious. You have the money. We know you have it. You sold the house. You have savings. You are just being spiteful because we didn't pick up the phone one time. One time I laughed a dry, humorless sound. It wasn't one time. It was a lifetime of taking and never giving. It was a lifetime of you thinking I was a fool. I turned to walk away. Brandon grabbed my arm. His grip was weak, nothing like the grip of a man who worked with his hands. "Dad, stop," he hissed. "You are making a scene. People are staring." "Let them stare," I said, pulling my arm free. "Maybe they will learn something." I walked out of the restaurant. I didn't look back. I heard Tiffany shouting something about being selfish, but her voice was drowned out by the blood rushing in my ears. I walked out into the cool night air of Chicago. The city lights were blurring. I felt lightheaded, but not from sickness. I felt lightheaded from the sheer weight of the bridge I had just burned. But I knew this wasn't over. As I walked towards the bus stop, my phone started buzzing in my pocket. It was Megan. Then Jason, my son-in-law. The vultures were gathering. They wouldn't let $500,000 slip away without a fight. They would come for me. They would come with guilt, with threats, with tears. But they didn't know one thing. They didn't know that the Harold Foster they thought they could manipulate had died on that operating table 6 months ago. The man who walked out of that hospital was someone else entirely, and he was ready for war. I locked the heavy oak front door, and through the deadbolt the sound of the metal sliding into place, echoing like a gunshot in the silent hallway. Outside I could still hear Megan's muffled sobbing and Jason's angry shouting, but they were on the other side of 2 inches of solid wood and 40 years of paid-off mortgage. I didn't look out the window. I didn't check to see if they were leaving. I went straight to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of tap water, my hands steady now, the adrenaline settling into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I needed a professional. I needed someone who could dig through the dirt without getting their hands muddy. I picked up the landline, the old beige phone that hung on the wall. I didn't use my cell phone because I didn't want any digital footprint of this call, not yet. I dialed a number I had memorized 30 years ago. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Sterling Law." "Leo," I said. "It is Harry. I need to see you. Now." Leonard Leo Sterling has been my attorney since I started my contracting business in 1982. He is a man cut from the same cloth as me. He doesn't wear Italian suits, and he doesn't work in a glass tower downtown. His office is a small brick building next to the county courthouse that smells of old paper, stale coffee, and the pipe tobacco he smokes when he thinks nobody is looking. Leo is 72 years old, short-bald, and has a mind like a steel trap. He is also the only person on earth besides the IRS who knows exactly how much I am worth. I drove over to his office in my new truck, taking the back roads to avoid seeing my children's car tailing me. When I walked in, Leo was sitting behind his desk, buried under a mountain of files. He looked up over his reading glasses, his bushy gray eyebrows knitting together. "Harry," he grunted, pointing to the leather chair opposite him. "You look like you just went 12 rounds with a concrete mixer. Sit down." I sat. The leather creaked, familiar and comforting. I didn't waste time with small talk. "My kids are trying to hustle me, Leo," I said, leaning forward. "Last night it was $500,000 for a restaurant. This morning it is $50,000 for a bookie who is going to cut off Brandon's fingers. They tried to get me to liquidate assets on the spot." Leo let out a low whistle. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "That is aggressive," he said, "even for them. I told you this would happen, Harry. When Beatrice passed, I told you the vultures would start circling. People smell grief, and they think it smells like opportunity." "I know," I said, rubbing my face with my callous hands. "But this feels different, Leo. It is desperate. They are not just greedy, they are panicked. Brandon is terrified of something, and Jason was looking at my garage like he wanted to pawn my lawnmower." Leo opened a drawer and pulled out a yellow legal pad and a fountain pen. "So what do you want to do?" he asked. "Do you want to cut them a check and make them go away?" "No," I said sharply. "Not a dime. I want to know the truth. I want to know what is actually happening." Leo nodded, scratching something on the pad. "Okay. We dig. I need you to run a full financial background check on Brandon," I said. "I want to know every credit card, every loan, every lien. If he owes money to a bookie, I want to know who. If he is in trouble, I want to know how deep. And Leo, I want you to look into a property in the West Loop, an old industrial warehouse. Brandon said he wanted to lease it for a restaurant." Leo stopped writing and looked up, his eyes sharp. "Lease it?" he asked. "That is what he said. $500,000 for the lease and the build-out." Leo snorted. $500,000 for a lease in this market? Harry, that buys you a building in some neighborhoods. If he is asking for that much cash up front for a rental, he is either the worst businessman in Chicago or he is lying." "He is lying," I said. "I just need to prove it." Leo leaned back in his chair, tenting his fingers. "You know, Harry, if we open this door, you might not like what we find. Sometimes it is easier to be the grumpy old man who said no than to be the father who knows exactly how rotten his kids are." I thought about that. I thought about the way Megan had looked at me this morning, the way she called me a monster. I thought about Brandon's silence at the restaurant while his wife insulted me. "I don't care about easy anymore, Leo," I said. "I care about the truth, and I need to protect what I built." Leo nodded solemnly. He reached for a file on the corner of his desk, a thick folder marked with my name. "Speaking of what you built," he said, opening the file, "we need to talk about your liquidity. Your tenants in the 3 apartment complexes in the south suburbs have all paid rent on time this month. The commercial strip mall on Main Street is fully leased for the next 5 years. And your investment portfolio managed to dodge the latest market dip." He slid a piece of paper across the desk toward me. It was a balance sheet. The bottom line showed a net worth north of $8 million. My children thought I was a poor old man living on a pension and a prayer. They saw the old clothes, the beat-up truck I used to drive, the coupon clipping. They didn't know that for 40 years I had taken every dollar of profit from my construction company and bought land when it was cheap. They didn't know I built rental units with my own crew at cost. They didn't know that while they were buying leased luxury cars and taking vacations on credit, I was compounding interest. "They think I am broke, Leo," I said, looking at the numbers. "They think the only money I have is from selling the house." "Good," Leo said, closing the file. "Keep it that way. Money is like blood in the water, Harry. If they know the real number, they won't stop at 50,000. They will come for everything. They will try to declare you incompetent." "That is what I am afraid of," I said quietly. "Tiffany made a comment last night. She said seniors have accidents. She said if I didn't pay, they might not be able to check on me." Leo's face went hard, stone hard. He sat up straight, the lawyer in him taking over completely. "She threatened you?" he asked, his voice low. "She implied it." Leo picked up the phone on his desk. "I am putting a rush on this investigation, Harry. I have a private investigator I use for heavy cases. Ex-cop. Good at finding things people want hidden. I will have him on Brandon and the West Loop property by noon." He looked at me, and for the first time I saw genuine concern in his eyes, not just professional interest. "And Harry, watch your back. If they are desperate enough to threaten you, they are desperate enough to do something stupid. Lock your doors. Don't let them in." I left Leo's office an hour later feeling a little lighter, but also heavier in a different way. I had set the wheels in motion. The investigation would yield results. But the reality of having to investigate my own son was a weight that sat on my chest like a wet bag of cement. I drove home. The house was quiet when I arrived. The silver SUV was gone. I checked the perimeter of the property like I was inspecting a job site. The fence I had fixed this morning was sturdy. The windows were intact. But the sense of safety I used to feel in my own home was gone, cracked down the middle. I went inside and locked the door behind me. The house felt too big without Beatrice. It was 4 bedrooms of silence. I walked into the kitchen and opened the pantry. It was stocked with canned soup crackers and instant coffee. I could afford steak. I could afford lobster. I could afford to hire a personal chef. But old habits die hard. I heated up a can of tomato soup on the stove, standing there watching the red liquid bubble. I ate it standing at the counter, dipping a piece of stale bread into the bowl. I looked at the photo of Beatrice on the fridge. It was taken 5 years ago on our 40th anniversary. She was smiling that warm, easy smile that made everything feel all right. I failed them, B, I whispered to the empty room. We tried to give them a better life than we had. We didn't want them to have to mix mortar in the freezing cold or scrub floors. We gave them college degrees. We gave them down payments. We gave them easy, and we ruined them. The phone rang, making me jump. I looked at the caller ID. It was unknown. I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to talk to anyone. 10 minutes later, my cell phone buzzed. It was a text message from Leo. I made a few calls. Preliminary look at the West Loop property. You need to come back to the office tomorrow morning. You are not going to believe this. I stared at the screen. My gut tightened. The intuition that had kept me alive on dangerous construction sites for 40 years was screaming at me. I put the bowl in the sink. I checked the locks on the doors one more time. I went into the living room and sat in my recliner, the old leather chair that molded to my back. I didn't turn on the TV. I just sat there in the dark, waiting for the morning, waiting to find out just how much my son had lied to me. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come. Instead, I saw Brandon's face at the restaurant. I saw the greed, and for the first time I wondered if the son I loved was even in there anymore, or if he had been completely replaced by the stranger who wanted my money. Tomorrow I would find out. Tomorrow the old fox would see the trap, and then I would have to decide whether to chew my leg off to escape or turn around and bite the hand that set it. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon, painting the suburban sky in hues of cold gray and pale orange when I walked out to the backyard. 7 in the morning is early for some, but for a man who spent 40 years waking up before the roosters to pour concrete, it is practically midday. My breath misted in the crisp morning air as I knelt on the damp grass, a heavy wrench in one hand and a galvanized bolt in the other. I was fixing the cedar fence that lined the west side of my property. A storm had loosened 2 of the panels last week. Most men my age would hire a handyman. They would sit inside with a cup of tea and watch the news, waiting for the world to come to them. But I am not most men. I like the bite of the morning air. I like the resistance of wood and steel. It reminds me that I am still here, still useful, still capable of holding my world together with my own 2 hands. And it proves that despite what my children might whisper to their friends, my mind and my body are as sharp as the tools in my belt. The silence of the morning was shattered by the roar of an engine. It wasn't a neighbor leaving for work. It was something urgent, something angry. Tires screeched against the asphalt of the street, and then crunched loudly as a vehicle swerved aggressively into my driveway. I didn't flinch. I didn't drop my wrench. I simply tightened the last bolt, gave the fence post a solid shake to test its stability, and stood up slowly, wiping my greasy hands on the rag I kept in my back pocket. I walked around the side of the house just as the car doors flew open. It was a silver SUV, the one my daughter Megan drove, even though she constantly complained about the gas mileage. She practically fell out of the driver's seat, wearing oversized sunglasses and a designer tracksuit that looked disheveled in a way that felt rehearsed. Her hair was messy, and she was already crying before her feet even hit the pavement. Jason, my son-in-law, stepped out from the passenger side. He is a tall man, soft around the middle, with shifting eyes that never seem to land on anything for more than a second. He was wearing a hoodie and jeans, looking around my property with a kind of nervous energy that put me on edge immediately. "Dad!" Megan screamed, running across the lawn. She threw herself at me, clutching my arm with a grip that was surprisingly strong. "You have to help, please, you have to help us." I stiffened. I didn't hug her back, not yet. I needed to assess the situation first. This wasn't a social call, not at 7 in the morning with that kind of entrance. "What is it, Megan?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "Is someone hurt? Are the kids okay?" She looked up, tears streaming down her face, slipping out from behind those dark glasses. "It is Brandon," she sobbed. "He is in trouble, Dad, real trouble." My stomach tightened for a second. Just a split second, the father in me took over. No matter what had happened at the restaurant last night, no matter the insults or the greed, Brandon was still my firstborn. The image of him hurt or bleeding sent a cold spike of fear through my gut. What kind of trouble? Is he in the hospital? "No," Megan wailed, shaking her head violently. "He lied to you last night, Dad. It is not for a restaurant. There is no restaurant. That was just a story he made up because he was too ashamed to tell you the truth." I narrowed my eyes. The adrenaline was starting to fade, replaced by a cold suspicion. "What truth, Megan?" "He owes money," she whispered, leaning in close as if the hedges were listening. "Bad money. He got mixed up with some people online, some gambling syndicate, and he lost everything. He tried to win it back, and he dug the hole deeper. They called him this morning Dad. They said if he doesn't pay $50,000 by noon today, they are going to hurt him. They said they are going to cut off his fingers." I looked at her, trying to process this new narrative. 12 hours ago, he was a visionary restaurateur, needing $500,000 for a fusion kitchen. Now, he was a degenerate gambler, needing $50,000 to save his digits. The pivot was fast, too fast. And then I looked up over Megan's trembling shoulder. I saw Jason. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't comforting his hysterical wife. He wasn't pacing with worry for his brother-in-law. He was standing by the corner of the garage, peering into the open door. He was staring directly at the brand-new truck I had bought to replace the Ford I sold 6 months ago. He was looking at my tools, my riding mower, his eyes scanning the contents of my garage like an appraiser at an auction. That look told me everything I needed to know. "Wait a minute," I said, pulling my arm away from Megan's grip. I took a step back, creating distance between us. "Let me get this straight. Last night he needed $500,000 for induction burners and blast chillers, and now this morning he needs $50,000 for a bookie. Which is it, Megan? Because the math does not add up. If he owes 50, why did he ask for $500,000? Megan stammered, her face flushing red. The rest was to get out of town, to start over somewhere safe, to buy a new identity. But the 50 is urgent. They are coming for him. Dad, you have to pay it." Jason stepped forward, then trying to look imposing, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "Look, Harry," he said, his voice dropping an octave, trying to sound reasonable. "We don't have time to debate the semantics or the accounting. The guy is in mortal danger. We know you have the liquidity. We know you didn't spend all the money from your contracting business. Just cut the check and we will handle the delivery. We will save his life." I looked at Jason. I looked at the greed etched into the lines of his face. He didn't care about Brandon's fingers. He cared about accessing my bank account. He thought that fear would make me open my wallet faster than ambition did. "You want me to handle it?" I asked calmly, my voice steady and hard. "Yes," Megan cried. "Yes, please, just give us the money." "Fine," I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "Get Brandon on the line right now. Tell him to come here immediately." "We can't," Megan shrieked. "He is hiding. He is terrified." "Then tell me where he is," I said, punching 3 numbers into my phone. I am calling the sheriff right now. I know the chief personally. We have played poker together for 20 years. I will have him put Brandon in protective custody immediately. If these threats are real, the police need to be involved." Megan's face twisted. Her eyes went wide with panic. "No, you can't call the police. They said no cops. If you call the cops, they will kill him." "Then we will pay them," I said. "But not with my money. If Brandon's life is in danger, we will liquidate his assets. I know he has that condo in the city. I know he has that BMW, and that watch on his wrist is worth 10,000 easily. Tell him to bring everything here. We will sell it all by noon. We will pay his debt with his own money." Jason stepped in front of me, blocking my path to the house. His face was ugly now, the mask of the concerned brother-in-law slipping away. "Listen, old man, you are not listening to us. We don't have time to sell a condo. We don't have time to pawn a watch. We need cash now. You are sitting on a pile of it. Stop being a selfish prick and save your son." I looked Jason dead in the eye. I didn't back down. I tightened my grip on the heavy steel wrench in my hand, just enough for him to notice. "I am not giving you cash," I said coldly, "and I am not playing this game. If Brandon is in danger, he goes to the police or he sells his own toys to pay for his mistakes. But I will not be the bank for his gambling or his lies." Megan let out a scream that sounded more like a tantrum than grief. "You are a monster," she hissed, stepping back as if I were something diseased. "Your own son is in mortal danger, and you are talking about assets and police reports. Do you want him to die, is that it? Do you want to see your son in a coffin, just so you can keep your precious money in the bank?" I looked at my daughter. I saw the manipulation, I saw the performance, and I saw the absolute lack of respect for the man who raised her. "I want him to grow up," I said, "and I want you to get off my property unless you are ready to tell me the truth. Because I smell a rat, Megan. And it smells a lot like a lie cooked up by desperate people who think their father is a fool." I turned my back on them and walked toward the house. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I heard them shouting behind me, cursing my name, but I didn't stop. I knew this wasn't about a bookie, just like it wasn't about a restaurant. It was about something else, and I was going to find out what it was, even if I had to tear this city apart brick by brick. 3 days of silence followed the morning confrontation. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that settles over a construction site right before a thunderstorm breaks. I didn't hear from Brandon. I didn't hear from Megan. My phone sat on the kitchen counter, black and quiet, like a grenade waiting for someone to pull the pin. I spent those days working on the house with a manic intensity. I repainted the trim in the living room. I snaked the drains in the upstairs bathroom. I power washed the driveway until the concrete looked brand new. I needed to keep my hands busy because if I stopped, my mind would start replaying the look on my daughter's face when she screamed at me. On Thursday afternoon, the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on a rag and walked to the front door, expecting another ambush. I expected Jason trying to apologize, or maybe Tiffany trying a different angle of manipulation. But when I opened the door, there was a stranger standing on my porch. He was a young man, barely 30, wearing a cheap suit that was shiny at the elbows and holding a thick manila envelope. "Mr. Harold Foster?" he asked, looking at a clipboard. I nodded. "That is me." He thrust the envelope toward me. "You have been served, sir. Have a nice day." He turned and walked away before I could even ask a question. He got into a nondescript sedan and drove off, leaving me standing there with the weight of the legal system in my hands. I went into the kitchen and sat at the table. I opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of legal documents thick as a brick. The title on the first page was printed in bold black letters that seemed to jump off the page and slap me in the face. Emergency petition for temporary conservatorship. Below that, in smaller letters, petitioners Brandon Foster and Megan Foster Clark, respondent Harold Foster. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands started to shake, not from age, but from a rage so pure it felt like liquid fire in my veins. I started to read. They weren't just suing me, they were trying to erase me. The petition claimed that I, Harold Foster, was suffering from rapid cognitive decline and onset dementia. It stated that I was no longer capable of managing my own financial or personal affairs and that I posed a danger to myself and others. I flipped the page to the section labeled Evidence of Incapacity. My breath hitched in my throat as I read the lies they had woven from the threads of my life. Item 1. The respondent recently sold a vintage vehicle valued at $40,000 for a fraction of its worth, exhibiting poor judgment and financial confusion. They used the sale of the Ford. They used the moment I saved my own life, the moment I sacrificed my most prized possession, because they wouldn't help me as proof that I was losing my mind. They twisted my desperation into dementia. Item 2. The respondent has exhibited aggressive and erratic behavior in public, including a recent incident at a fine dining establishment, where he threw money at family members and caused a scene indicating a loss of emotional control. My stand at the steakhouse. My refusal to be bullied. They had painted it as the tantrum of a senile old man. Item 3. The respondent is living in squalor, attempting unnecessary and chaotic home repairs at inappropriate hours, signaling a breakdown in daily living skills. Fixing my fence at 7 in the morning, keeping my house maintained. To them, it was chaos. To them, a man working with his hands was a man losing his grip. They wanted everything. The petition asked the court to freeze all my assets immediately. It asked for Brandon to be named the conservator of my estate, giving him full control over my bank accounts, my properties, and my investments. It asked for Megan to be named the conservator of my person, giving her the legal right to decide where I lived and what medical care I received. They wanted to put me in a home. They wanted to lock me away in a facility, medicate me until I drooled, and sell off everything I had built for pennies on the dollar so they could open their restaurant and pay off their debts. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood up, grabbed the keys to my new truck, and walked out the door. I drove to Leo's office like a man possessed. I broke 2 speed limits on the way, but I didn't care. When I burst into his office, Leo was on the phone. He took one look at my face, hung up without saying goodbye, and stood up. "What happened, Harry?" he asked. I threw the papers onto his desk. It landed with a heavy thud. "They did it, Leo," I said, my voice rasping. "They actually did it. They are trying to Britney Spears me." Leo put on his glasses and picked up the petition. He read in silence, his face growing darker with every page. He muttered curses under his breath, words I hadn't heard since we worked on the docks together in the 70s. "This is nuclear." "Harry," he said, finally dropping the papers back onto the desk. "This isn't just a lawsuit. This is a declaration of war. They are trying to strip you of your civil rights. If a judge grants this, you won't be able to write a check, sign a contract, or even vote without their permission." "Can they do this?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe because my legs felt weak. "Can they just take a man's life away because they want his money?" Leo rubbed his temples. "In the state of Illinois, an emergency conservatorship can be granted ex parte, meaning without you even being there, if they can prove immediate danger. But usually judges are skeptical. They need medical evidence. They need a doctor to sign off on this." He flipped to the back of the packet. He stopped. His eyes narrowed. "Here it is," he said, tapping a page. "Exhibit D, a physician's statement." I walked over and looked at the page. It was a standard medical form filled out in sloppy handwriting. It stated that Harold Foster had been examined and found to be suffering from moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease with symptoms including paranoia, memory loss, and aggression. At the bottom of the page was a signature, Dr. Anthony Aris, MD. I stared at the name. I knew Dr. Aris. He was my cardiologist. He was the man who had treated my heart condition for 10 years, but I hadn't seen him in 6 months. I hadn't seen him since the surgery at St. Jude's, which was performed by a different surgeon because Aris was on vacation. I haven't seen Aris since last year, I said, pointing at the date on the form which was dated 3 days ago. I haven't been to his office. How could he examine me? Leo looked at the signature closely. He pulled a file from his drawer, my file, and found an old letter from Dr. Aris regarding my blood pressure medication. He held the two signatures side by side. They look similar, Leo grunted. But look at the slant on the T. Look at the loop on the S. He looked up at me, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. Harry, this signature is forged. Forged, I repeated. It is a good forgery, Leo said. But it is sloppy in the details. And if you haven't been to his office, there is no record of a visit. No insurance claim. No copay. If we subpoena his appointment book and it shows you weren't there, this entire petition doesn't just get thrown out. It becomes a felony. He picked up the phone. I am going to call Aris's office right now, Leo said. We are going to verify this. But Harry, listen to me. This means they are desperate. People don't commit felony fraud unless they are backed into a corner. Brandon and Megan aren't just greedy anymore. They are dangerous. They are gambling their freedom on the hope that you are too old and too tired to fight back. I sat down in the leather chair opposite him. I felt a cold calm settling over me again, displacing the rage. They made one mistake, Leo, I said quietly. What is that, Harry? They forgot that I built the house they grew up in, I said. I know where the beams are. I know where the load-bearing walls are. And I know exactly where to place the dynamite to bring the whole thing down. Leo smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Let's get to work, Harry. While Leo made the calls, I sat there and thought about my children. I thought about the little girl who used to cry when she scraped her knee, and the boy who wanted to be a superhero. Somewhere along the way, those children died. They were replaced by these strangers who would forge a doctor's note to lock their father away. Leo hung up the phone a few minutes later. I spoke to the receptionist, he said. Dr. Aris is in Europe. He has been at a medical conference in Geneva for the last week. He couldn't have signed that affidavit 3 days ago unless he has a teleportation device. So it is fake, I said. It is fake, Leo confirmed. And whoever submitted it to the court just committed perjury and fraud. I leaned back, closing my eyes. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sick. My own children were willing to risk prison to steal from me. So what do? I asked. Do we go to the police? Leo tapped his pen on the desk. We could, he said. We could have them arrested by dinner time. But that is messy. And honestly, Harry, if you arrest them, the money they owe, the debts they have, it all becomes your problem in the court of public opinion. You become the dad who put his kids in jail. He leaned forward. Leo pushed a heavy cardboard banker box across his desk, and the sound of it sliding against the wood was the only noise in the office for a long moment. It was filled with paper trails, financial records, and the ugly little secrets that people think they can hide in the digital age. Leo looked tired. He looked like a man who had seen too much of the dark side of human nature, and he was looking at me with a mixture of pity and professional resolve. Open it, Harry, Leo said, his voice low and gravelly. But brace yourself. You are not going to like what you see. The private investigator did a deep dive. We pulled credit reports, bank statements, and property records. We found the truth, and it is uglier than we thought. I reached into the box and pulled out the first file labeled Brandon Foster Financials. I expected to see names of loan sharks or suspicious cash withdrawals to unknown entities. I expected to see the footprint of organized crime, or at least a dangerous bookie. Instead, I saw statements from Visa, American Express, and Discover. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the rows of transactions. There were charges for high-end restaurants, nightclubs, and designer clothing stores. There were recurring payments to online gambling sites, DraftKings, FanDuel, and offshore poker rooms. And there were dozens of transfers to a woman named Chloe, who I definitely knew was not his wife. He doesn't owe money to the mob, Harry, Leo said, leaning forward. He owes money to the banks. He has maxed out 5 credit cards and taken out 2 personal lines of credit. His total debt is $53,000, not $500,000, just 50. I stared at the number. $50,000. It was a lot of money, but it wasn't a death sentence. It wasn't worth threatening to cut off fingers. It was the kind of debt an irresponsible man racks up when he wants to live like a king on a pauper's salary. He lied about the danger, I whispered. He lied about the urgency. He lied about everything, Leo confirmed. He is not in danger of losing his fingers. He is in danger of losing his credit score. And his wife if she finds out about Chloe. I looked at the bank transfers again. Chloe. Thousands of dollars sent to a woman who wasn't Tiffany. My son wasn't just a liar and a gambler. He was an adulterer. He was betraying everyone in his life simultaneously. The image of the desperate, terrified man he played at my front door dissolved, replaced by the image of a selfish child playing with matches. But why 500,000? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. If he owes 50, why ask for $500,000? Even with the mistress, that is a huge leap. Leo reached into the box again and pulled out a thick binder. It was dustier than the other files, smelling of old toner and bureaucracy. He slammed it onto the desk. This is why, he said. This is the West Loop property. I opened the binder. The first page was a listing from a commercial real estate liquidation firm. There was a photo of the brick warehouse Brandon had shown me on his phone. But there was no for lease sign in the window. There was a foreclosure notice. Read the listing price, Leo said. I looked at the bold print. Bank owned. Cash only. As is. Price $450,000. 450, I said. Leo nodded. And Brandon asked for 500. Do the math, Harry. He wants the extra 50 to pay off his credit cards. I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. He pays off his gambling debt, gets rid of the mistress payments, and breaks even. It is worse than that, Leo said, his eyes hard. Look at the title search. I had my guy pull the preliminary purchase agreement that was drafted yesterday. It hasn't been signed by you. It was drafted for a buyer named B&T Hospitality Group, LLC. Who is B&T Hospitality, I asked, though I already knew the answer. Brandon and Tiffany, Leo said. He incorporated it 3 days ago, Harry. He isn't trying to lease that building for a restaurant. He is trying to buy it. He wants you to give him the cash, thinking you are paying for a lease and renovations. But he is going to use that cash to buy the property outright, free and clear in his name. I sat back, the room spinning slightly. He steals the property, I said, my voice trembling with rage. He uses my money to buy himself an asset worth $500,000. And it doesn't stop there. Leo continued, ruthlessly laying out the autopsy of my son's scheme. Once he owns it free and clear, do you know what he does next? He waits 6 months. He does some cosmetic paint jobs. Then he goes to a bank and takes out a commercial mortgage against the property. A cash-out refinance. He pulls out $300,000 or $400,000 of equity. He pays off his debts, buys a new car, maybe goes on a vacation with Chloe. And if the restaurant fails, if he never even opens it, he walks away. He still has the money. And you are left with nothing but a hole in your bank account and a son who ghosted you. It was brilliant. In a twisted, evil way, it was brilliant. It was the kind of scheme that required planning, foresight, and a complete lack of conscience. He was going to steal a building, I said. He was going to steal a building right under my nose and make me thank him for the privilege of investing. And to make sure you didn't ask questions, Leo added, pointing to the medical file he tried to take away your legal right to object. Leo opened the final folder. Inside was the affidavit from Dr. Aris's office manager, notarized and stamped. It stated unequivocally that Dr. Anthony Aris had been out of the country on the date the medical evaluation allegedly took place. It included a copy of his flight itinerary and his hotel receipts from Geneva. "This is the nail in the coffin," Harry Leo said softly. "Forging a doctor's signature on a court document isn't just a dirty trick. It is a Class 3 felony. It is perjury. It is fraud. If we hand this to the district attorney, Brandon doesn't just lose the lawsuit. He goes to prison. Minimum 3 years, maybe 5. I looked at the documents spread out across the desk. The credit card statements showing the gambling. The real estate listing showing the foreclosure. The affidavit proving the forgery. It was a map of my son's soul, and it was a barren, ugly landscape. I thought about the morning he was born. I thought about how I held him in my arms, his skin so new and fragile, and promised to protect him from the world. I thought about the days I spent teaching him how to ride a bike, how to throw a baseball, how to be a man. Somewhere I had failed. I had raised a wolf and invited him into the sheepfold. But I wasn't a sheep. I was the shepherd. And sometimes the shepherd has to shoot the wolf to save the flock. I felt the tears prickling behind my eyes, hot and stinging. Not tears of sadness. Tears of mourning for the relationship that was dead. The son I loved was gone. In his place was a criminal who viewed me as prey. "Can we stop him?" I asked, my voice steadying. "We can bury him," Leo said. "We can file a counter motion. We can present this evidence to the judge. We can have him arrested for fraud before the sun goes down." I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "An arrest is too quick. It is too clean. He will play the victim. He will cry to his mother's memory. He will tell the family I am a vindictive old man who put his son in jail over a misunderstanding. I don't want him to be a martyr, Leo. I want him to be exposed. I want him to feel the ground crumble beneath his feet the way he tried to make it crumble beneath mine." I picked up the real estate listing. I looked at the price again. $450,000. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dusty street. "Buy it," I said. Leo paused. "Excuse me." "Buy the building," I said, turning to face him. "Use the liquidity in the trust. Make a cash offer today. Full asking price. $450,000. No contingencies. Quick close. I want the deed in my name, Harold Foster, by tomorrow afternoon." Leo stared at me, his mouth slightly open. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "You are going to hijack his deal," he said. "I am going to buy the stage for his little play," I said. "And then I am going to invite him to perform." "Call him," I continued, the plan crystallizing in my mind like concrete setting in a mold. "Call Brandon. Tell him I am breaking. Tell him the lawsuit has scared me. Tell him I am confused and tired and I just want to make peace. Tell him I am ready to give him the money for the lease." Leo started laughing, a dry, rasping chuckle that shook his chest. "You are going to lure him in," Leo said. "You are going to let him think he won." "I am going to give him the rope," I said, "and I am going to watch him tie the noose." "Set up a meeting," I ordered. "Tell him to meet us at the real estate broker's office tomorrow. Tell him to bring the lease agreement. Tell him to bring Tiffany and Megan. I want the whole family there. I want witnesses." "And the medical forgery?" Leo asked, tapping the affidavit. "Keep it in your briefcase," I said. "That is the nuclear option. When he realizes the money is gone, when he realizes the building is mine, he is going to panic. He is going to scream. He might even threaten me again. And that is when you put that paper on the table. That is when we remind him that his freedom hangs by a thread that I am holding." Leo stood up and extended his hand. I shook it. His grip was firm, dry, and reassuring. "I will make the call, Harry," he said. "Go home. Shave. Put on your best suit. Tomorrow you are not the victim. Tomorrow you are the boss." I walked out of the office and into the afternoon sun. The city looked different to me now. It looked sharper, clearer. The fog of grief and confusion that had clouded my mind for 6 months was gone. I knew exactly who my enemies were. I knew exactly what they wanted. And I knew exactly how to destroy them. I got into my truck and started the engine. The rumble of the V8 was a comfort. I drove home not to hide, but to prepare. I had a building to buy. I had a trap to set. And I had a lesson to teach that my children would remember for the rest of their miserable, greedy lives. Her voice soft and soothing. We want to protect you, Harry. You are living here all alone. You are making irrational decisions like selling the truck. We just want to make sure you are safe and managed. Managed. Like a project. Like a liability. I took a deep breath, letting it shudder in my chest. I don't want to go to a home, I said, looking up at them, trying to make my eyes look watery and desperate. I want to stay here. This is where your mother is. We can discuss that, Brandon said, crossing his arms. But Dad, we need to know that you are cooperative. We need to know that you trust us to handle your affairs. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. If I help you, I said. If I give you the money for the restaurant. Will you drop the lawsuit? Will you tear up those papers and promise never to file them again? Will you let me stay in my house? The room went silent. I could practically hear their hearts beating faster. This was it. The moment they had been waiting for. The surrender. Brandon looked at Tiffany. She gave a barely perceptible nod. Dad, if you invest in our future, Brandon said slowly, choosing his words with care. If you show us that you are still capable of making rational decisions for the good of the family, then yes. We can withdraw the petition. We can hire a nurse to come here instead of moving you. We can make this all go away. But we need the capital, Tiffany added quickly. The opportunity in the West Loop won't wait. If we lose that location, we lose everything. And then we might have to reevaluate your living situation. The threat was subtle, but it was there, hanging in the air like smoke. Pay up or get locked up. I nodded slowly, staring at the floor. 500,000, I muttered. Yes, Brandon said, leaning forward. 500,000. It secures the lease, the equipment, and the initial operating costs. It secures our future, Dad. And yours. I let out a long sigh, a sound of defeat. Okay, I said. Okay. I will do it. Brandon let out a breath he had been holding. He smiled a wide, genuine smile of triumph. Tiffany squeezed his knee, her eyes glittering with greed. That is the right decision, Dad, Brandon said. You won't regret it. We can go to the bank right now. I can drive you. We can get a cashier's check. I shook my head. No, I said, my voice a little stronger. No check. Brandon's smile faltered. What do you mean? You said you would do it. I am not giving you the money, I said, looking up at him. I am not handing you a check so you can run off and do who knows what. If I am going to do this, I want to do it right. I want to see what I am buying. What do you mean? Tiffany asked, her voice sharp. I want to see the building, I said. I want to meet the landlord. I want to hand the check to the owner of the property myself. I want to sign the lease as a guarantor if I have to. But I want to be there. I want to see your future, Brandon. If this is going to be my legacy, I want to touch the bricks. Brandon hesitated. I saw the calculations running behind his eyes. He was wondering if this was a trap. He was wondering if he could pull it off. He had told me he was leasing it, but I knew he was buying it. He probably had the broker set up to play along, or he figured he could explain away the purchase agreement as a lease-to-own deal once we were in the room. He was arrogant enough to think he could talk his way through the details. Dad. That is really complicated, Brandon said. The landlord is a busy guy. The broker handles everything. Then call the broker, I said. Set up a meeting, tomorrow. If I don't hand the check to the person responsible for the building, you don't get a dime. and you can drag me to court, but I will fight you every inch of the way, and I will spend every penny I have on lawyers before I let you declare me incompetent. It was a gamble. I had to show just enough spine to make the threat real, but keep enough weakness to make them believe they could still manipulate me. Brandon looked at Tiffany again. They were having a silent conversation. They figured they could handle the broker. They figured that once I saw the papers, they could confuse me with jargon, or simply lie about what I was signing. After all, I was just a senile old man who fixed fences at dawn. "Okay, Dad," Brandon said. "Okay. If that is what it takes. We will set it up. Tomorrow morning." "Noon," I said. "Noon tomorrow. I need time to get the money ready." "Fine," Tiffany said, standing up and smoothing her dress. "Noon. But Harry, don't back out. If you play games with us tomorrow, the deal is off and the lawsuit goes forward. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said, lowering my head again. "I just want peace." "We all want peace, Harry," Tiffany said, patting my shoulder with a condescending rhythm. "You are doing the right thing." Finally. They left the house walking with a bounce in their step. I watched them through the window as they got into their car. I saw them high-five each other. They were celebrating. They were counting the money. They were picking out the colors for their new kitchen. As soon as their taillights disappeared around the corner, I stood up. I straightened my back. I unbuttoned the flannel shirt and threw it into the laundry hamper. I walked into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. The gray stubble made me look old, yes, but the eyes staring back at me were clear and cold. I grabbed my razor and shaving cream. I shaved off the stubble, revealing the sharp line of my jaw. I splashed cold water on my face, washing away the performance, washing away the victim. I walked into my bedroom and opened the closet. I pushed aside the work shirts and the old jackets. In the back, protected by a plastic cover, was my best suit. It wasn't the charcoal one I wore to the funeral. It was a navy blue Italian wool suit I had bought 10 years ago for a meeting with the City Planning Commission. It was tailored. It was sharp. It was the suit of a man who commanded respect. I laid it out on the bed. I polished my black dress shoes until they shone like mirrors. They thought they were walking into a closing. They thought they were walking into a payday. They were walking into an execution. I picked up my phone and called Leo. "It is set," I said. "Noon tomorrow." They took the bait. "Good," Leo said. "I closed on the property an hour ago. The deed is being recorded as we speak. By tomorrow morning, you will legally own every brick, every window, and every square inch of that warehouse." "And the broker?" I asked. "He is on board," Leo chuckled. "It turns out he doesn't like Brandon very much. Brandon tried to cut his commission last week. The broker is more than happy to let the real owner of the building run the meeting." "Perfect," I said. "Harry," Leo said, his voice turning serious. "Are you ready for this? When you drop this hammer, there is no going back. They will hate you." "Let them hate me," I said. "I would rather be hated and respected than loved and robbed." I hung up the phone. I looked around my empty, silent house. Tomorrow the silence would be broken. Tomorrow the truth would come out screaming, and I would be the one holding the microphone. The office of Platinum Key Realty was located on the 42nd floor of a glass tower that pierced the Chicago skyline like a needle. It was a place designed to intimidate. The floors were polished marble, the walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, and the air smelled of expensive espresso and money. It was the kind of place where people like my son Brandon felt important, and people like— "We can discuss that," Brandon said, crossing his arms. "But Dad, we need to know that you are cooperative. We need to know that you trust us to handle your affairs." I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. "If I help you," I said, "if I give you the money for the restaurant, will you drop the lawsuit? Will you tear up those papers and promise never to file them again?" Will you let me stay in my house? The room went silent. I could practically hear their hearts beating faster. This was it. The moment they had been waiting for. The surrender. Brandon looked at Tiffany. She gave a barely perceptible nod. Dad, if you invest in our future, Brandon said slowly, choosing his words with care. If you show us that you are still capable of making rational decisions for the good of the family, then yes. We can withdraw the petition. We can hire a nurse to come here instead of moving you. We can make this all go away. But we need the capital, Tiffany added quickly. The opportunity in the West Loop won't wait. If we lose that location, we lose everything. And then we might have to reevaluate your living situation. The threat was subtle, but it was there hanging in the air like smoke. Pay up or get locked up. I nodded slowly, staring at the floor. 500,000, I muttered. Yes, Brandon said, leaning forward. 500,000. It secures the lease, the equipment, and the initial operating costs. It secures our future, Dad. And yours. I let out a long sigh, a sound of defeat. Okay, I said. Okay. I will do it. Brandon let out a breath he had been holding. He smiled a wide, genuine smile of triumph. Tiffany squeezed his knee, her eyes glittering with greed. That is the right decision, Dad, Brandon said. You won't regret it. We can go to the bank right now. I can drive you. We can get a cashier's check. I shook my head. No, I said, my voice a little stronger. No check. Brandon's smile faltered. What do you mean? You said you would do it. I am not giving you the money, I said, looking up at him. I am not handing you a check so you can run off and do who knows what. If I am going to do this, I want to do it right. I want to see what I am buying. What do you mean? Tiffany asked, her voice sharp. I want to see the building, I said. I want to meet the landlord. I want to hand the check to the owner of the property myself. I want to sign the lease as a guarantor if I have to. But I want to be there. I want to see your future, Brandon. If this is going to be my legacy, I want to touch the bricks. Brandon hesitated. I saw the calculations running behind his eyes. He was wondering if this was a trap. He was wondering if he could pull it off. He had told me he was leasing it, but I knew he was buying it. He probably had the broker set up to play along, or he figured he could explain away the purchase agreement as a lease-to-own deal once we were in the room. He was arrogant enough to think he could talk his way through the details. Dad. That is really complicated, Brandon said. The landlord is a busy guy. The broker handles everything. Then call the broker, I said. Set up a meeting, tomorrow. If I don't hand the check to the person responsible for the building, you don't get a dime. And you can drag me to court, but I will fight you every inch of the way, and I will spend every penny I have on lawyers before I let you declare me incompetent. It was a gamble. I had to show just enough spine to make the threat real, but keep enough weakness to make them believe they could still manipulate me. Brandon looked at Tiffany again. They were having a silent conversation. They figured they could handle the broker. They figured that once I saw the papers, they could confuse me with jargon or simply lie about what I was signing. After all, I was just a senile old man who fixed fences at dawn. Okay, Dad, Brandon said. Okay. If that is what it takes. We will set it up. Tomorrow morning. Noon, I said. Noon tomorrow. I need time to get the money ready. Fine, Tiffany said, standing up and smoothing her dress. Noon. But Harry, don't back out. If you play games with us tomorrow, the deal is off and the lawsuit goes forward. Do you understand? I understand, I said, lowering my head again. I just want peace. We all want peace, Harry. Tiffany said, patting my shoulder with a condescending rhythm. You are doing the right thing. Finally. They left the house walking with a bounce in their step. I watched them through the window as they got into their car. I saw them high-five each other. They were celebrating. They were counting the money. They were picking out the colors for their new kitchen. As soon as their taillights disappeared around the corner, I stood up. I straightened my back. I unbuttoned the flannel shirt and threw it into the laundry hamper. I walked into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. The gray stubble made me look old, yes, but the eyes staring back at me were clear and cold. I grabbed my razor and shaving cream. I shaved off the stubble, revealing the sharp line of my jaw. I splashed cold water on my face, washing away the performance, washing away the victim. I walked into my bedroom and opened the closet. I pushed aside the work shirts and the old jackets. In the back, protected by a plastic cover, was my best suit. It wasn't the charcoal one I wore to the funeral. It was a navy blue Italian wool suit I had bought 10 years ago for a meeting with the City Planning Commission. It was tailored. It was sharp. It was the suit of a man who commanded respect. I laid it out on the bed. I polished my black dress shoes until they shone like mirrors. They thought they were walking into a closing. They thought they were walking into a payday. They were walking into an execution. I picked up my phone and called Leo. "It is set," I said. "Noon tomorrow." They took the bait. "Good," Leo said. "I closed on the property an hour ago. The deed is being recorded as we speak. By tomorrow morning, you will legally own every brick, every window, and every square inch of that warehouse." "And the broker?" I asked. "He is on board," Leo chuckled. "It turns out he doesn't like Brandon very much. Brandon tried to cut his commission last week. The broker is more than happy to let the real owner of the building run the meeting." "Perfect," I said. "Harry," Leo said, his voice turning serious. "Are you ready for this? When you drop this hammer, there is no going back. They will hate you." "Let them hate me," I said. "I would rather be hated and respected than loved and robbed." I hung up the phone. I looked around my empty, silent house. Tomorrow the silence would be broken. Tomorrow the truth would come out screaming, and I would be the one holding the microphone. The office of Platinum Key Realty was located on the 42nd floor of a glass tower that pierced the Chicago skyline like a needle. It was a place designed to intimidate. The floors were polished marble, the walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, and the air smelled of expensive espresso and money. It was the kind of place where people like my son Brandon felt important, and people like me usually felt invisible. But today I didn't feel invisible. I felt like a demolition expert walking into a building I was about to implode. I walked in wearing my navy blue Italian suit. I had shaved. I had combed my hair. I looked like the man I used to be before grief bent my spine. But as soon as I saw them sitting in the conference room, I let my shoulders slump just a fraction. I let a slight hesitation enter my step. I needed them to see the victim one last time. I needed them to believe that the suit was just a costume on a dying man, not the armor of a warrior. Brandon, Tiffany, and Megan were already there. They were sitting around a conference table that looked like it cost more than my first house. They were dressed for a celebration. Brandon was wearing a suit that was too shiny, a shade of electric blue that screamed new money. Tiffany was wearing a dress that was probably silk and definitely expensive. Even Megan, who had been sobbing in my driveway yesterday, looked radiant today. Her tears had miraculously dried up, replaced by the glowing anticipation of a payday. When I walked in, they all stood up. It was a performance of respect, a choreographed dance of dutiful children greeting their beloved patriarch. Dad, Brandon said, coming over to guide me to the chair at the head of the table. "You look great. Really sharp. Here, let me take your hat. Sit down. Relax, we have water, coffee, whatever you need." He touched my elbow, guiding me as if I were made of glass. I let him. I sat down slowly, making a show of settling my old bones into the ergonomic leather chair. "Thank you, son," I said, my voice soft and weary. "It is a long drive. I am just ready to get this over with." "We all are," Harry Tiffany said, flashing a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. We just want to get everything signed so you can go back home and rest. We know this is stressful for you. I looked around the table. At the far end sat a young man who looked like he had been manufactured in a factory that built slick real estate agents. He had perfectly gelled hair, a tan that didn't come from the sun, and a smile that looked painful to maintain. This was Jack the broker. Leo had told me about him. Jack was hungry. Jack was unethical. And Jack had absolutely no idea that the ground beneath his feet was mined. Mr. Foster, Jack said, smoothing his tie. It is an honor to meet you. Brandon has told me so much about you. He says you are a man of vision. I bet he did, I thought. I bet he told you I was a senile old cash cow ready to be milked. I just want to help my family, I said out loud, keeping my eyes on the table. Of course, Jack said. And this deal will certainly do that. It is a unique structure, Mr. Foster. Very forward-thinking. He slid a thick document across the polished wood surface. It stopped right in front of me. The cover page was heavy stock paper, cream-colored with gold lettering. Commercial lease agreement. Term 10 years. Total initial capitalization $500,000. I stared at the document. I didn't open it immediately. I let the silence stretch out. I could hear Brandon tapping his foot nervously under the table. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythm of greed. Is this it? I asked. This is it, Dad, Brandon said, leaning forward. This secures the space. Once you sign this and provide the funds, the landlord hands over the keys. We can start demolition next week. I opened the folder. My eyes scanned the legal jargon. It was a masterpiece of deception. The contract was a triple net lease, which meant the tenant was responsible for taxes, insurance, and maintenance. But the kicker was the upfront payment. It wasn't a security deposit. It was labeled as a capital improvement contribution. Essentially, I was paying $500,000 to renovate a building I wouldn't own for a business I wouldn't control. And there, tucked away on page 15, was the clause Leo had warned me about. The assignment clause. It allowed the tenant B&T Hospitality to assign the lease or sublet the property without the guarantor's permission. It meant they could take my money, fix up the building, and then sublease it to someone else, keeping the profit, while I stayed on the hook for the liability. It was theft wrapped in a lawyer's suit. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my reading glasses. I put them on, slowly adjusting the frames on my nose. I reached for the heavy silver pen that Jack had placed next to the document. My hand started to shake. I let the tremor travel from my wrist to my fingers until the pen rattled against the paper. It was a subtle vibration, a physical manifestation of weakness. I heard Megan let out a small breath of impatience. She checked her watch. She was probably wondering if the bank would still be open to cash the check if the old man didn't hurry up. Just sign on the bottom line, Dad, Brandon said, pointing to the signature block with a manicured finger. Right there next to the X. I lowered the pen to the paper. The tip hovered millimeters above the line. I looked at the ink flowing from the nib. It was black. Permanent. I took a breath. I thought about the hospital. I thought about the cold wind in the parking lot. I thought about the silence of my phone for 4 months. I am not sure, I said, my voice quavering. It is a lot of money, Brandon. Are you sure this is the right thing to do? Brandon's patience snapped. He reached out and put his hand over mine, trying to steady it, trying to force the pen down. Dad, we talked about this. He hissed, his voice tight. You promised. Do you want the lawsuit to go forward? Do you want the court to get involved? Just sign the damn paper so we can all go home. Sign it, Harry Tiffany urged. It is for the best. Don't be difficult now. We are so close. I looked at Jack the broker. He was sweating. He was wiping his upper lip with a handkerchief, looking between me and Brandon. He knew this was coercion. He knew this was elder abuse, but he wanted his commission. So he looked away, pretending to study a file on his laptop. I looked back at the paper. I watched the tip of the pen touch the fiber. A tiny dot of ink bloomed on the signature line. Then I stopped. I froze my hand. I stopped the shaking. I let the tremor die out completely until my hand was as steady as a stone pillar. I lifted the pen. I placed it gently on the table, lining it up perfectly parallel with the edge of the document. I sat up straight. I pushed my chest out, filling the Italian suit the way it was meant to be filled. I took off my reading glasses and folded them, placing them in my breast pocket. When I looked up, my eyes were not the eyes of a confused old man. They were the eyes of a foreman who just caught a crew cutting corners. They were cold, clear, and hard. I looked past Brandon. I looked past Tiffany and Megan. I locked my gaze directly onto Jack, the broker. "Jack," I said, my voice deep and resonant, filling the room without shouting. Jack jumped. He looked at me, startled by the sudden change in tone. "Yes, Mr. Foster?" I tapped the document with a steady finger. "I am confused, Jack," I said. "Confused, sir?" "Yes," I continued. "You seem to be a competent young man. You work for a reputable firm, so I have to ask you a question." I leaned forward, the leather of the chair creaking. "Why did you hand me a 10-year lease agreement for $500,000 when this morning at 9 a.m. your boss sent over the purchase agreement for the entire building?" The room went dead silent. It wasn't a quiet silence. It was a vacuum. It was the sound of all the air being sucked out of the room at once. Brandon froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Tiffany's head snapped toward Jack so fast I thought her neck would crack. Jack turned pale. His eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit. I don't know what you mean, sir," Jack stammered. "The lease, this is the deal Brandon structured." I ignored Brandon. I kept my eyes on Jack. "I bought the building, Jack," I said. "I wired $450,000 to your firm's escrow account at 10:15 this morning. The deed transfer was recorded an hour ago. I own the bricks. I own the dirt. I own the air conditioning unit on the roof. So why are you asking me to sign a lease for a property I already own?" Brandon stood up so fast his chair fell over backward, crashing onto the floor. "What are you talking about?" he screamed, his voice cracking. "You didn't buy it. You don't have the money to buy it. You are broke." I slowly turned my head to look at my son. I didn't shout. I didn't stand up. I just looked at him with a pity that was worse than anger. "Sit down, Brandon," I said. "The adults are talking." Brandon stood there, his chest heaving, looking like a man who had just watched his parachute fail to open. The silence in the room was broken only by the sound of a door opening behind me. It was the side office, the one Jack the broker had claimed was empty storage. Leo walked out. He wasn't wearing his usual rumpled cardigan. He was wearing his court suit, charcoal gray and sharp as a razor blade. He carried a leather briefcase in one hand and a thick document with a blue cover in the other. "Who the hell is this?" Brandon demanded, stepping back, his eyes darting between me and the new arrival. "This is my lawyer," I said calmly. "And he is the man who just closed the deal." Leo walked to the table without saying a word. He placed the blue document in the center of the polished wood, right on top of the lease agreement they had tried to force me to sign. The sound of the heavy paper hitting the table echoed like a judge's gavel. "It is a certified copy of the warranty deed," Leo said, his voice dry and professional. "Recorded with the Cook County Clerk of Court at 10:15 this morning. The property located at 1142 West Randolph Street has been sold." "Sold." Brandon whispered, the color draining from his face until he looked like a ghost. "Sold to who?" Leo pointed a finger at the document. "Read the grantee line." Brandon leaned over, his hands shaking so badly he had to grip the edge of the table to stay upright. He read the name. Harold Foster. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with shock and confusion. "You bought it," he stammered. "You actually bought it." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "I told you I wanted to see where my money was going," I said. "I told you I wanted to touch the bricks. Well, now I own them. I own the roof. I own the floor. I own the dirt underneath. I paid $450,000 cash." "But why?" Brandon cried. "Why buy it? We just needed the lease. We needed the capital for the build-out." "Because I know what you were doing," I said, my voice dropping to a growl. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the second file, the one Leo had prepared with the private investigator. I threw it onto the table. It slid across the wood and stopped right in front of Tiffany. "I know about B&T Hospitality Group," I said. "I know you weren't going to lease the building. You were going to use my $500,000 to buy it outright in your name. You were going to tell me it was rent and renovations while you pocketed the deed." Tiffany turned pale, her hand flying to her mouth. And then I continued, standing up slowly to loom over them. "I know what the second step was. You were going to wait 6 months, maybe paint the walls. Then you were going to go to a bank and take out a commercial mortgage against the property. You were going to pull out $300,000 of equity. Cash out." I pointed a finger at Brandon. "You were going to use that money to pay off your $53,000 in gambling debt. You were going to pay off the credit cards you maxed out on dinners and trips. And you were going to use the rest to keep pretending you are a big shot while I was left holding the bag for a restaurant that was never going to open." Brandon stepped back, hitting the wall. "That is not true," he protested, his voice thin and weak. "We were going to open the restaurant. It was a business plan. It was a shell game," I roared, slamming my hand on the table. "You think I am stupid. You think because I work with my hands I can't read a balance sheet. I built this city, boy. I know a hustle when I see one. You were going to steal a $500,000 asset from your own father and then mortgage it to cover your mistakes." Tiffany let out a screech that sounded like a wounded animal. "You tricked us," she screamed, her face twisting into an ugly mask of rage. "You lied to us. You said you would give us the money. You promised." "I didn't promise you anything," I said coldly. "I said I would handle it. And I did. I protected my investment." "You stole our future," she yelled, lunging toward the table as if she could claw the deed away. "That building was supposed to be ours. We found it. It was our idea." "Ideas are free, Tiffany," I said. "Real estate costs money. And since you don't have any money because your husband gambled it all away on online poker, you don't get the building." Megan, who had been silent this whole time, stood up slowly. She looked at the file on the table, then at Brandon. "Gambling?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Brandon, you said it was a business loan. You said the $50,000 was for permits." "He lied to you too, Megan," I said, softening my tone just a fraction. "He lied to everyone. There is no business. There is no loan shark. There is just a man who can't stop betting on sports and buying things he can't afford." Brandon looked at his sister, then at his wife, then at me. He was cornered. And like a cornered rat, he tried to bite. "You think you are so smart?" He sneered, his face red and sweaty. "You think you won. Well, you forgot one thing, old man. The lawsuit. We still have the petition. The court date is set. We are going to declare you incompetent. We are going to tell the judge you are paranoid, that you are spending money erratically buying buildings you don't need. This just proves we are right." I smiled. It was the smile of a man who is about to drop the final beam on a demolition project. "I was hoping you would say that," I said. I looked at Leo. He nodded and reached into his briefcase. He pulled out a single sheet of paper protected by a plastic sleeve. He placed it gently on top of the deed. It was the medical affidavit, the one with the signature of Dr. Anthony Aris. Brandon looked at it, and I saw the moment his soul left his body. His eyes went dead. His mouth opened, but no air came in. We know Brandon, Leo said, his voice calm and lethal. We know Dr. Aris was in Geneva at a medical conference on the day he supposedly signed this. We have his flight records. We have his hotel receipts. And we have a sworn statement from his office manager saying he hasn't seen your father in 6 months. Brandon slumped against the wall, sliding down until he was crouching on the floor, his head in his hands. That is forgery, I said, looking down at him. That is perjury. That is fraud committed against the court. Leo tells me that is a Class 3 felony. Minimum sentence is 2 years, maybe 5 if the judge is having a bad day. Tiffany stopped screaming. She looked at Brandon huddled on the floor, then at the document that could send her husband to prison. She backed away, her hands trembling. I didn't sign it, she whispered. I didn't know. He did it. It was his idea. I looked at her with disgust. Even now, at the end, she was throwing him to the wolves to save herself. You were part of the conspiracy, Tiffany, Leo said. You are listed as a petitioner. You signed the document swearing the contents were true. You are just as guilty as he is. The room was silent, broken only by the sound of Brandon's jagged breathing. The broker Jack had quietly packed up his laptop and slipped out the side door, realizing his commission had just evaporated into a potential criminal investigation. I looked at my children, my son broken and criminal on the floor, my daughter shocked and weeping as the lies unraveled, my daughter-in-law turning on her husband like a viper. This is what greed does, I said, my voice quiet now. This is what happens when you value money over blood. You wanted everything. You wanted my house, my savings, my dignity. And now you have nothing. I picked up the deed and the medical file. I own the building, I said, and I hold your freedom in my hand. So now we are going to talk about terms. And you are going to listen very carefully because I am only going to say this once. Leo didn't move from his spot by the table. He didn't gloat, and he didn't smile. He just stood there with the stillness of a man who knows he is holding a loaded gun, and he looked down at Brandon, who was still crouched on the floor, weeping into his hands. Get up, Brandon, Leo said, his voice cutting through the sobbing like a knife. You are making a mess of your suit. Brandon scrambled to his feet, wiping his face with his sleeve, trying to regain some shred of dignity, but it was gone. He looked at me, his eyes red and terrified, waiting for the blow. Here is how this is going to work, Leo said, opening his briefcase and pulling out a single sheet of paper. This is a voluntary withdrawal of the petition for emergency conservatorship. It states that upon further review, the petitioners have realized that Harold Foster is of sound mind and body and that the filing was a misunderstanding. You are going to sign this, right now, both of you. Brandon reached for the pen, his hand shaking, but Tiffany slapped it away. And if we sign it, she hissed, her eyes darting between Leo and the door. What do we get? Do we get the money? Do we get the lease? Leo laughed, a short, sharp bark of amusement. You get to go home, Tiffany, Leo said. You get to sleep in your own bed tonight instead of a holding cell at the county jail. If you sign this and walk away, Harold agrees not to press charges for the forgery. He agrees to bury the evidence of the fraud. That is the deal. Your freedom for his freedom. Tiffany stared at him, her chest heaving. It wasn't enough for her. She wanted to win. But what about the debts, she shrieked. What about the credit cards? What about the loans? If we don't pay them, they will ruin us. That sounds like a personal problem, Leo said coldly. Sign the paper, Brandon, I said, speaking for the first time since the revelation. Sign it, or I swear to God I will call the district attorney myself and I will drive the evidence over to his office. I am done playing games. Brandon looked at me and he saw that I meant it. He grabbed the pen from the table and scribbled his signature so hard the paper almost tore. He shoved it toward Tiffany. Sign it, he begged her, his voice pathetic and thin. Just sign it, Tiff. Please. I can't go to jail. I can't do time. Tiffany looked at him with pure, unadulterated hatred. She snatched the pen and signed her name, slashing the letters across the page. There she spat, throwing the pen down. We signed it. Are you happy now, old man? You won. You beat your own children. I hope you feel like a big man. I didn't feel big. I felt hollow. I felt like I was watching a building collapse in slow motion, knowing there was nothing I could do to stop it. We aren't done yet, I said. They froze. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I unlocked it and opened my email. I scrolled to a message I had received that morning from the management company of the luxury high-rise where Brandon and Tiffany lived. 5 years ago, when Brandon was starting out and didn't have the credit score to rent a luxury apartment, I co-signed the lease as a guarantor, I said. I put my name on the line so you could live in a building with a doorman and a gym you never use. Brandon went pale again. Dad, wait. The lease is month to month now, I continued, ignoring him. And as the guarantor, I have the right to terminate my liability with 30 days' notice. But because I know the landlord personally, because I fixed his roof after a storm back in '99, he did me a favor. I turned the phone around so they could see the email. He terminated the lease effective immediately for violation of the financial covenants, I said. You missed rent 3 times in the last 6 months, Brandon. I covered it. I paid it without telling you, because I didn't want you to be homeless. But I am done paying. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises. I said, my voice steady. The locks will be changed tomorrow at noon. Anything left inside will be moved to the curb. Tiffany screamed. It wasn't a word, it was just a sound of pure rage. You can't do that, she yelled, lunging toward me. That is our home. That is where we live. Where are we supposed to go? You can go wherever you want, I said. But you can't stay there. And you can't come to my house. I turned to Megan. She was standing in the corner, quiet and pale, clutching her designer purse like a shield. And you, Megan, I said. You signed that petition too. You were ready to lock me away. So here is your reality check. I paid for your car. I paid for your wedding. I paid for the down payment on your house. I paused, letting the weight of my generosity hang in the air. That stops today. I am removing you from my will. I am removing you as a beneficiary on my life insurance. I am closing the joint account we used for emergencies. You are on your own. Megan burst into tears. Real ugly tears. But Dad, she wailed. Jason just lost his job. We need help. We have the mortgage. We have the kids. Then Jason should get a job. I said, looking at my son-in-law, who was trying to blend into the wallpaper. Any job. I hear the construction industry is hiring laborers. It is hard work, but it pays honest money. Maybe he should try sweating for a living instead of waiting for me to die. The room exploded. The tension that had been building for an hour finally detonated. Megan turned on Brandon, her face twisted and ugly. This is your fault, she screamed, hitting him on the chest with her purse. You said this was a sure thing. You said he was senile. You said he would just sign the check. You dragged me into this. I didn't force you, Brandon shouted back, pushing her away. You wanted the money just as much as I did. You were the one who found the lawyer. You were the one who said we should put him in a home. Liar, Megan screeched. I never said that. I just wanted to help him manage his money. You are the one with the gambling problem. You are the degenerate. Tiffany laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that cut through the noise. Oh, look at you two, she sneered. The loser twins. I should have known better. I should have listened to my mother. She told me not to marry into this family. She told me Brandon was a weakling with no ambition. Brandon turned to his wife, his eyes wide with betrayal. You spent the money too, Tiff, he said, his voice rising. Who do you think bought those shoes? Who do you think paid for the trips to Cabo? You spent every dime I won, and then you demanded more. I expected a man, Tiffany yelled, getting in his face. I expected a provider. Not a pathetic little boy who has to steal from his daddy to pay his bookie. You are useless, Brandon. You are absolutely useless. I am leaving. She turned to grab her bag, but Brandon grabbed her arm. You are not going anywhere, he said. We are in this together. Get off me, she shouted, clawing at his face. I am done. I am calling a lawyer. I am taking half of whatever is left, which is probably nothing, because you are a failure. They were screaming at each other, tearing each other apart with words that would leave scars forever. They were like wolves, fighting over a carcass, snapping and biting, fueled by fear and greed. I stood there and watched them. I watched the family I had built, the children I had raised, descend into madness. And I felt nothing. No anger. No satisfaction. Just a vast, empty silence where my heart used to be. I looked at the table. The deed to the building was there. The forged medical document was there. The lease agreement was there. It was a still life of a tragedy. I took out my checkbook. I uncapped my pen. Leo watched me, his eyes questioning. I wrote a check. It wasn't for them. It was for Leo. $5,000 for his fee plus a bonus for the expedited work. I tore the check out of the book, the sound sharp and final. Leo, I said, raising my voice over the shouting match. Here is your payment. Thank you for everything. Leo took the check. He looked at the screaming family, then back at me. Are you okay, Harry? He asked quietly. I am fine, I said. I am better than fine. I am awake. I picked up the deed and the medical affidavit. I put them in my inside pocket next to my heart. I turned to walk away. Brandon saw me moving. He broke away from Tiffany and lunged toward me, grabbing the sleeve of my jacket. Dad, wait. He pleaded, tears streaming down his face mixed with snot and sweat. Dad, please. Don't leave us like this. We can fix it. I will change. I promise. Just help me one last time. Please. I am your son. I looked down at his hand gripping my sleeve. I looked at his face. It was the face of the boy who used to ask for ice cream, but it was twisted by years of entitlement. I gently pried his fingers off my jacket one by one. You are my son, I said, my voice soft but firm as granite. And I love you. I will always love you. But I don't like you, Brandon. And I don't trust you. And right now I don't even want to know you. I stepped back, creating a chasm between us that money could never bridge. You wanted to be a man, I said. Being a man means cleaning up your own messes. Start cleaning. I turned and walked out the door. I walked past the receptionist who was staring wed-twaun at the commotion coming from the conference room. I walked to the elevator and pressed the button. As the doors closed, I could still hear them screaming. I could hear Tiffany threatening divorce. I could hear Megan sobbing about her mortgage. I could hear Brandon begging the empty air for salvation. The elevator descended smooth and silent. I leaned my head against the cool metal wall and closed my eyes. It was over. The lie was over. I walked out into the lobby and through the revolving doors. The street noise of Chicago washed over me, horns honking, people talking the rhythm of the city. I walked to my truck. I got in and started the engine. I checked my phone. It was noon. I had one more stop to make. One more piece of business to conclude before I could truly start my new life. I put the truck in gear and pulled out into traffic. I wasn't going home to my empty house. I was going to find the only person in this city who had helped me when I had nothing. I was going to find Sarah. I drove to the south side of the city, away from the glass towers and the overpriced restaurants. I drove to a neighborhood where the buildings were low and the streets were cracked, where men still walked home with dirt under their fingernails and lunch pails in their hands. I pulled my new truck into the gravel lot of Miller's Auto Repair. It was a small cinder block building with a corrugated metal roof and a sign that had been fading since the 80s. Behind the shop sat a food truck. It was old and dented, painted a cheerful yellow that was peeling in spots. The window was closed, but I could see a light on inside. I parked and stepped out. Before I could even walk to the shop door, a silver SUV screeched into the lot behind me, kicking up a cloud of dust. It was Brandon. He had followed me. He and Tiffany scrambled out of the car, looking out of place in their designer clothes amidst the scrap metal and used tires. Megan pulled up a second later in her sedan. They ran toward me, breathless and frantic. "Dad, wait," Brandon shouted. "Just listen to us. We can work this out. We can pay rent. Real rent. Just don't shut us out." I didn't answer him. I turned toward the garage bay door as it rolled up with a metallic rattle. A young woman stepped out. She was wearing blue coveralls stained with grease and oil. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and there was a smudge of carbon on her cheek. She looked tired. She looked like she had been working since dawn. This was Sarah Miller. She was 26 years old. She worked as a mechanic during the day to help her father and ran her food truck at night, trying to save enough money to go to culinary school. Sarah wiped her hands on a rag and looked at the scene in front of her. The screaming family in suits. The old man they were chasing. She didn't look scared. She looked concerned. "Mr. Foster," she said, walking over to me, ignoring my children. "Are you okay? Is your heart bothering you again? I can get you a chair." I smiled at her. It was the first genuine smile I had felt on my face in months. "I am fine, Sarah," I said. "I just came to pick up my truck." "Your truck?" Tiffany sneered, looking at the girl with disdain. "Who is this grease monkey, Harry? Is this where you are spending your money now? On low-class mechanics?" Sarah stiffened, but she didn't say a word. She just stood a little taller. "Shut up, Tiffany," I said, my voice cracking like a whip. "You will show her respect. This woman has more class in her little finger than you have in your entire body." Brandon stepped forward, looking confused. "Dad, what is going on? Why are we here?" I walked over to the side of the garage. Parked there under a protective tarp was my 1978 Ford F-150. Sarah walked over and pulled the tarp off, revealing the two-tone blue and white paint. It was polished. The chrome gleamed in the afternoon sun. It looked better than the day I sold it. 6 months ago, I said, running my hand over the hood, I stood in this lot, shivering and dying. "I sold this truck to Sarah's father, Frank, for $12,000 because I needed surgery, and you told me to figure it out myself." I looked at Brandon. He looked away. Frank knew what this truck was worth. I continued. He knew I was desperate. He could have taken it for $5,000. He could have stripped it for parts. But he didn't. He gave me every dime he had in the shop safe. And then do you know what he did? I looked at Sarah. Her eyes were shining. "He put a tarp over it," I said. "He told Sarah Mr. Foster is going to want this back when he gets well. We are just holding it for him. He refused to sell it to anyone else. He turned down offers for triple the price because he gave a handshake to a dying man. And while I was in the hospital, I said, turning to Megan, Sarah came to visit. She didn't know me. She only knew I was the old guy who sold the truck. But she brought me chicken soup. She sat with me when I was scared. She treated me like a human being, not a burden." Sarah blushed, looking down at her work boots. "It was just soup, Mr. Foster. You looked lonely." "I was lonely," I said. "My family was too busy with crypto and cocktail parties to visit. But you were there." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the deed to the warehouse in the West Loop. I held it up. Brandon's eyes locked onto the paper. His greed flared up one last time, desperate and pathetic. "Dad, please," he whispered. I turned to Sarah. "Sarah, I know about your dream," I said. "I know you want to open a bakery. I know you have the talent, but you don't have the capital. I know banks won't talk to you because you don't have a credit history. Sarah looked at me confused. I am saving Mr. Foster. I almost have enough for a down payment on a new oven for the truck. You are not going to need the truck, I said. I took her hand. It was rough, calloused, and warm. I pressed the folded deed and a set of keys into her palm. This is the deed to a building at 1142 West Randolph Street, I said. It is a brick warehouse. It has good bones. It needs work, but the foundation is solid. Just like you. Sarah stared at the papers. What is this? She whispered. It is yours, I said. Well, it is mine. But as of today, you are the tenant. I pulled a second document from my pocket, a single-page lease agreement I had drawn up with Leo. 5 years, I said. $1 a month. Sarah gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. $1. $1, I repeated. You pay the utilities. You pay the insurance. But the rent is $1. You use that money you saved to buy your ovens. You build your kitchen. You bake your bread. You make something real, Sarah. Tiffany let out a strangled cry of outrage. You are giving it to her, she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Sarah. You are giving our restaurant to a mechanic. She is a nobody. She isn't even family. I turned on my heel and looked at my daughter-in-law with eyes of ice. She is family, I said. Because family isn't about whose blood you have. It is about who shows up when you are bleeding. She fed me when I was hungry. She protected my property when I was weak. She honored me when I had nothing. I looked at Brandon and Megan. You have my blood, I said. But she has my heart. I turned back to Sarah. She was crying openly now, tears making tracks through the grease on her face. Why, she asked. Why would you do this for me? Because you are a builder, Sarah, I said softly. I can see it in your hands. You build things. My children only know how to destroy. I want my legacy to be something that stands the test of time, not something that gets gambled away. I reached into my pocket one last time and pulled out the cashier's check for $12,000 plus interest. I handed it to her. Give this to your father, I said. Tell him I am buying my truck back, Mr. Foster? You don't have to. Sarah started. I want to, I said. I missed her. I walked over to the Ford. I opened the door. The familiar smell of old leather and gasoline hit me, and it smelled like freedom. It smelled like home. I climbed into the driver's seat. It fit me perfectly. I put the key in the ignition. Brandon ran up to the window. He grabbed the frame, his face desperate. Dad. Where are you going? He asked. What about us? What are we supposed to do? I started the engine. The V8 roared to life, a deep, throaty rumble that shook the ground. You are going to figure it out, I said, shouting over the engine. You are going to get jobs. You are going to pay your debts. You are going to learn what it feels like to earn $1 instead of begging for one. But we will lose everything, Megan cried. You already lost everything, I said. You just didn't realize it until now. I put the truck in gear. Goodbye, Brandon, I said. Good luck. You are going to need it. I released the clutch, and the truck surged forward. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't need to see them standing there in the dust. Their expensive clothes ruined their plans, shattered. I knew what they looked like. They looked like the past. I drove out of the lot and onto the main road. The sun was setting over the Chicago skyline, painting the city in gold and purple. I rolled down the window and let the wind hit my face. I was 70 years old. I was alone. I had a bad heart and a lot of scars. But as I merged onto the highway heading toward the horizon, I felt lighter than I had in 20 years. I had cleaned the rot out of my foundation. I had poured fresh concrete. And for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to seeing what I could build next. It has been 12 months since I drove that truck out of the mechanic's lot and into the sunset. And let me tell you, a lot can change in a year when you stop carrying dead weight. Last week, I stood on the sidewalk of West Randolph Street in front of the building I bought for $450,000. It doesn't look like a foreclosure anymore. The brick has been tuck-pointed, the windows have been replaced, and there is a hand-painted sign hanging above the door that reads the Blue Truck Bakery. Sarah didn't want to name it that. She wanted to call it Harry's Place. But I told her that my name belongs on the deed, not the menu. I told her to name it after the thing that brought us together. The place was packed. There was a line stretching down the block. People were waiting 40 minutes for Sarah's sourdough bread and her grandmother's apple pie recipe. I watched through the window as Sarah moved through the dining room. She was wearing a white chef's coat now, not grease-stained coveralls, but she still had that same determination in her eyes. She stopped at a table to talk to a family, and I saw her laugh, that genuine, tired laugh of someone who is building their own dream. I walked inside. The smell of yeast and cinnamon hit me like a warm hug. Leo was already there, sitting at a corner table with a cappuccino and a croissant. He waved me over. "You know, Harry," Leo said, wiping crumbs from his tie, "this is the best investment we ever made. The property value in this neighborhood has gone up 15% in the last year." I sat down. I didn't care about the property value. I cared about the fact that I had a place to go where people smiled when I walked in. "Did you get the update?" Leo asked, his voice dropping lower. I nodded. I had received the report that morning. Brandon is working at a car rental agency out by O'Hare Airport. He is living in a studio apartment in a bad part of town. The last I heard, he was trying to sue Tiffany for support. But since she declared bankruptcy 3 months ago, there is nothing to take. They are like two crabs in a bucket pulling each other down. Megan and Jason lost their house. The bank foreclosed on them 90 days after I cut off the emergency fund. They are renting a duplex 2 towns over. Jason is working construction now. He is a laborer carrying hod for a masonry crew. I drove by his job site once from a distance. I saw him sweating. I saw him struggling with the weight of the bricks. And for the first time I felt a flicker of hope for him. Maybe the work will make a man out of him yet. Sarah walked over to our table. She put a fresh plate of pastries down in front of me. "On the house, Mr. Foster," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "I told you to charge me, Sarah," I said. "I am a paying customer." "You are the landlord." She smiled. "And the rent is $1. I think I can afford a Danish." She sat down with us for a minute. She told us about her plans to expand the kitchen, about the new oven she was ordering. She talked about the future with excitement, not entitlement. She didn't ask me for a loan. She showed me her profit and loss statement and asked for my advice on zoning laws. I looked at her and I realized that I had finally succeeded as a father. I just had to find the right child to raise. When I left the bakery, the sun was shining. I walked to my truck, the 1978 Ford F-150. It was parked right in front. I ran my hand along the fender. It was cold and solid. I am not lonely anymore. I have my Tuesday dinners with Leo. I have my Sunday mornings at the bakery, helping Sarah fix the odd, leaky faucet or squeaky hinge. I have my dignity. I don't wait for the phone to ring anymore. I don't wait for apologies that aren't coming. I realized that my legacy isn't the money I leave behind. It is the opportunities I create for the people who deserve them. I got into the truck and turned the key. The engine roared to life, a sound that never gets old. I pulled out into traffic, merging with the flow of the city I helped build. I am 71 years old. My hands are rough. My back hurts when it rains. But as I drove down the street humming along to the radio, I realized something important. I am the richest man in Chicago. Not because of the millions in the bank, but because I finally know the difference between the price of things and the value of people. The most painful lesson I learned at 70 years old is that sharing DNA does not make you family. My father Hector planted a seed of kindness 60 years ago that saved my life when my own children left me to die. True wealth isn't the millions in the bank or the real estate you own. It is the integrity you keep when no one is watching, and the people who show up when you have nothing to offer but your presence. Don't let toxic people drain your spirit just because they are blood. You have the right to build your own peace. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to save yourself? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one.